Good evening, everyone. My name is Mónica Melendez, and I will be your host this evening. Welcome to the third ELT training session organized by SBS International Library in an alliance with Ricardo Palma University. One more time, let me introduce myself. My name is Mónica Melendez, and I will be your host in this very pleasant evening. For those joining us for the first time, let me give you a brief introduction to the ELT training sessions. These are 6 conferences that are going to be held throughout 2024. They are addressed and specially organized and thought, carefully planned for teachers of English, teachers who seek professional growth, who want to enrich their professional practice and sharpen their teaching skills. Our aim with this set of sessions is to cover a broad array of topics in the ELT field, current trends in the teaching of English, as well as key topics that will have, we know for sure, a profound and positive impact on your work. Let's get to know SBS International Libraries with the following video. Adelante, equipo.
En SBS Librería Internacional, estamos comprometidos con la educación y la difusión de la cultura a través de materiales físicos y digitales. Somos una de las cadenas más grandes de Sudamérica, orientada a producir y distribuir libros de idiomas, académicos y de interés general, así como bibliografía clásica e imprescindible. Hemos consolidado nuestra presencia en Perú con librerías ubicadas estratégicamente en Lima, Cusco, Arequipa, Trujillo, Piura, Chiclayo, Iquitos y Huancayo. Además de una librería online, donde presentamos una gran variedad de títulos que podrás recibir desde la comodidad de tu hogar, gracias a nuestro servicio de delivery a nivel nacional. Además, Acompañamos el desarrollo profesional de maestros a través de eventos académicos y capacitaciones gracias a nuestro programa SBS Advantage Docente. SBS Librería Internacional. Soluciones para quien enseña y para quien aprende.
Thanks to the team at the backstage. At this point, I would like to thank Idiomas Ricardo Palma, Universidad Ricardo Palma's Language Center, and a strategic ally in the organization of these sessions. Mr. Simón Schwarzemberg, our speaker this afternoon, is a teacher trainer at Universidad Ricardo Palma, specifically a professor at the specialization program in English language teaching, organized by URP, or Universidad Ricardo Palma's Oficina de Rectorado. To get to know Idiomas Ricardo Palma a little bit more, we have the following video for you. Adelante. Thank you for the video. At this point, we would like to mention that you can see on the chat box the link to the attendance form. Make sure that you fill out the form by clicking on the link, and by doing so, in 10 working days, you will be receiving the certificate, which will be sent to the email you type on the form, together with a summary of today's content, the content that Mr. Schwarzemberg has carefully prepared for you. We are very happy to work in an alliance with SBS to deliver to you important information that will make you flourish in the path of being an English teacher. Together with SBS, we not only love books and reading, we also love learning, and that is what has summoned us this afternoon. It is a pleasure for me to introduce you to Mr. Simón Schwarzemberg, who we have already here on screen. Let me read a brief introduction, a brief biodata to get to know Mr. Schwarzemberg a little bit more. Simón is a graduate from the English teaching program for primary and secondary education at Andrés Bello University in Chile. He continued his studies abroad by completing an academic English course at Brigham Young University in Utah, USA. In 2019, he moved to Peru to pursue the degree in the specialization program in English language teaching at Ricardo Palma University, where he graduated in 2020. He is currently pursuing a master's degree in higher education at Ricardo Palma University. He also holds several international certifications, such as the CAE or CAE, the TOEFL, the MET or MET from Michigan University, the TKT, and several others. He's also a teacher trainer at Universidad Ricardo Palma and is the academic support at Idiomas Ricardo Palma, our language center. Our topic today, as you all know, is key principles and approaches in the 21st century English language teaching. There is a lot going on in the ELT field always, and we are more than eager to hear you this afternoon that turned into an evening. Hello, Simon. Welcome. Welcome to the ELT training sessions. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very much, Monica, for the lovely introduction. Thank you, everyone, so much for jumping in and joining us today. Feel free to use the chat box to leave your comments and share your experiences. I will ask for your participation and I will be reading the chat box. I'm stoked to be here today, and especially because we'll talk about this important topic. Let me share my screen. And there it is. Key principles and approaches in 21st century English language teaching. So, the aims of today's session are to identify the key principles in ELT and their practical application, and to implement engaging activities tailored to students' needs. So, let's start with this face-to-face and online classes. Both of these settings require different techniques. However, the core principles that we're going to look at today apply to the both of them. So it's going to it's going to help you if you're teaching online or if you're teaching face to face. Let's take a look at this timeline. This is how ELT or English language teaching has evolved over the last decades. You can comment on in the chats or in the chat box if you've seen any of these methods, if you've ever learned English using any of these methods, or if you recognize these methods. I'm looking at that way because I have two screens, so I'm looking at the comments. All right. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. All right. Yes. Okay. Neil Alejo says yes. Let's contextualize and let's start with this timeline. It starts with the grammar translation method. I'll just give you a brief overview of the main characteristics of these methods because I could talk about this the whole hour. The grammar translation method started way before the 1900s, and it had a focus on reading and writing, translating texts, learning lots of vocabulary. And then we had the direct method, right? As you can see around 1910. And it had an emphasis on speaking and listening. The students could not use Spanish. It was English exclusively. After that, we moved towards the audiolingualism, which was based on the behaviorist theory. You probably remember Skinner or Pavlov or Watson. These were the theory, basically the ones who came up with the theory. And they basically stated that language learning was a process of habit formation through stimulus, right? Or stimulus response. And well, then we have more, right? We have the silent way, we have total physical response, we have community language learning, Suggestopedia, and I want to stop in communicative language teaching. Some of the characteristics of this approach or this method at the time was basically communication and the use of authentic material. There was an emphasis on interaction, on tasks, activities that stimulate real life communication. So let's begin with communicative language teaching. And it emerged in response to changes in language teaching. As you can see, there were lots of methods. People were still trying to figure out which method was the best. And that's why it emerged in response to changes in language teaching. It shifted attention from structural knowledge to communicative competence. And it accepts errors or mistakes as a natural part of language learning, emphasizing fluency over accuracy in initial stages. It's very common that they or teachers don't want students to make mistakes, but that's not ideal, right? Students make mistakes and they can learn from the mistakes if we give them the right feedback, for example. When this method came up, it was basically because there was an increased interdependence among countries. Globalization was happening at the time. The world was more connected and more of an interdependent place. English started to be seen as the lingua franca, especially after World War II. And governments started to say, you know what? We want people to communicate using the language. So what is communicative approach? Because we started with the communicative language teaching. And an approach describes the nature of the subject matter to be taught. In that case, we are always going to be conscious that we want our students to speak, we want our students to communicate. And that's through teamwork and collaboration. That's why those two are encouraged. If students work together, they can work in circles, they can work, in pairs, in groups. We want to focus on lowering the anxiety and building trust. So that's why the communicative language teaching stopped being a method, and it was more, or it became more of approach, right? And communicative competence was the final goal. And of course, language is communication. Good evening, everyone. Now, let's talk about communicative competence because we mentioned that. Okay, someone said here in the comments, lexical approach. Yes, there's so many different approaches and methods. I couldn't include them all. So communicative competence. It's the general ability to communicate accurately and effectively in different contexts using cohesion and coherence. This is by Canali and Swain. There is not a uniform definition of communicative competence because there's so many different models. This concept in particular, I paraphrased it, but it was elaborated by Canali and Swain in the 80s. And they proposed a model for communicative competence. We actually talked about this last year when I talked about communicative competence or developing communicative competence. And their research built on the idea or the ideas of Delheims, who was the one who coined the term communicative competence, because he was investigating and he basically reacted to Chomsky's distinction between competence and performance. So it is very, very important to develop communicative competence, not just our students, but teachers as well. There is a misconception that English is a content subject, but it's more practice. And so this is a very good opportunity to reflect and probably evaluate how you teach, and if you're thinking about making your class communicative. Good evening, good evening. All right. Let's take a look at this. What is this? Have you ever seen it? What do you take from this? I'll be reading the comments. I'm going to look that way. Waiting for the comments. All right. Yes, they recognize it. Very good. Absolutely. That's the CEFR. Very good. Thank you, Manuel. This is the CEFR, of course, says Neil. Excellent. I'm glad. The Common European Framework. Yes, absolutely. Most of us know this because, well, it's all international certifications are based on this. Language courses are based on this, or they should. And well, you were right. These are the international levels according to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And this is international standard for describing language ability. It describes language ability on 6-point scales, right, from A1 to C2. And well, if you've ever taken international exams, if you're into language learning, you know this. Yes, absolutely. Now, this was taken from a publication, which is called, of course, the Common European Framework of Reference. And there is so much more. It's actually a conceptual framework. This was made in 2001. It was updated in 2020. Of course, the framework remains the same. It's still valid. And most teachers think that the levels are the only information from this, but actually there's so much more. It's a full book or comprehensive guide, and it has chapters on language competence, language activities, language use, language strategies, how to teach reading, how to teach writing, how to teach listening. all of it, all of it. So there's so much more. It's so important to read it. And inside the Common European Framework of Reference, the comprehensive guide, there is a model with or related to communicative language competences. And there are three. As you can see here in the screen, we have the linguistic competence, we have the sociolinguistic competence, and the pragmatic competence. And then we have descriptors and indicators. So that's what we want our students to achieve. So when we talk about linguistic competence, we're talking about something that is fundamental. A lot of people focus maybe probably too much on it, which is basically grammar and vocabulary, but lexis, phonology, morphology, syntax, all of that goes into that competence or subcompetence. Then we have the sociolinguistic competence, which basically relates to the learner's ability to use English that matches the social context that they're in. So in pretty much most English-speaking cultures, it's not acceptable to address an authority with, hey, dude, right? We're not going to say that. Of course, we want to be polite. So that would be the sociolinguistic competence. Or when you go to a restaurant, for example, I always tell my students, and teachers always tell their students, do not say I want. It's better to say I would like, right? Otherwise, you are going to be considered rude. So these are things that we need to consider, and that would be the social linguistic competence. And then we have the pragmatic competence, which is basically related to flexibility when we talk about adapting, right? From formal to informal, informal, formal. Turn taking, if they know how to manage a conversation flow, if they can, and ask and answer follow-up questions. And then we have thematic development, we have coherence and cohesion, propositional precision, and then fluency. So there's a whole universe inside this book. But today we're only focusing on this communicative competence, which goes within the communicative approach. Exactly. Be polite, Tabitha. Very good. Good afternoon. All right. There is a lot of available literature when we talk about principles and when we talk about English language. There is one book, well, I kind of peeked into these books a little bit to create this presentation. We have one that is called Techniques and Principles in Language Teaching. We have another one, it's called 8 Principles for Teaching and Learning English, 8 Principles. And then we have one that I thought it was really, really interesting. It was not available, I had to buy it. It's from TESOL, right? TESOL is an international association. It's actually the largest community dedicated to English language teaching. And they have this guide, and it's called the 6 Principles, right? It's a series of books, I imagine. And well, there's an overview. They have 6 points. Know your learners, create conditions for language learning. I thought it was really, really interesting, but I mostly based my presentation today on the specialization program for English language teaching. At Ricardo Palma University, we have a program where we teach how to teach English, and we're actually starting in August. We have 4 areas of study: effective communication, English language teaching methodology. We have one that is English and integrated education in today's globalized world. And the last one was about effective planning and organization in the classroom. So I kind of gathered a lot of information from these modules. We have 8 modules, and I created this. So let's start reflecting. And before I show my principles, I want to ask, what are your principles, or what are the principles that you follow when you teach? What are the things that you always consider when you are creating your class, when you are in front of the students? What are the principles, right? It could be anything. I'm going to read the comments. Let's see. People are thinking. Just give me good ideas. All right, good evening. All right, excellent. More people are joining. That's great. Encourage active learning. That's excellent. We're actually going to talk about that. Thank you, Stephen. Encourage active learning. That's a good one. That could actually be one of the principles. Communicative approach. Very good. Excellent, Rosa. Yerika, motivation. Of course. Yeah, motivation is somewhere there. We are going to talk about motivation. Motivation and inspiration. Oh, I liked inspiration. I like that one. Motivation says one. Okay, Rose. Motivation to learn a new culture. We are going to talk about culture. Thank you for bringing this up. The warm up. I've got to know my yes, of course, getting to know your learners, students' needs. Oh, I like that. That's a very good immersion, communicative approach. Okay, very good. Those were excellent ideas. Let me show you my ideas. These are the ideas that I found online in the program and in the available literature. So we are going to go one by one, and we're going to kind of dissect each one of them. So we are going to start with the first one, student-centered approach, or sometimes learner-centered approach. People are still saying, giving more ideas. Very good. Motivation by encouraging to try day after day. Excellent. I have a question. What is a learner-centered approach? In your own words, your own idea, what would you say that is? What does a learner-centered classroom look like? Let me see the comments. You are participating a lot. That's great. Let me take a look at the comments. Communicative skills and motivation. Less teacher talking time and more student talking time. That's great. Wonderful. Thank you, Manuel. We are going to talk about that. Understand your students and their needs. Very good. Yes. The students are the principal. Excellent. You couldn't have said it better. This approach encourages collaboration, self-paced learning, and use of varied instructional methods to engage the students and make learning more relevant and personalized. So over here, I found this information on the web. A learner-centered approach focuses on the needs, someone in the comments said needs, abilities, interests, someone said interests as well, very good, and learning styles of students. It emphasizes active learning, critical thinking, and student autonomy, where teachers act as facilitators rather than directors of learning. Pretty concise. I think I don't have to add anything else. Let's take a look at the difference so I can make it even clearer. The difference between a teacher-centered classroom and a student-centered classroom. So when the attention is on the teacher, or when we have a teacher-centered classroom, which is not the idea, the teacher does most of the talking. But don't you get tired of talking sometimes? The classroom is orderly. Students remain quiet. Can you imagine like a quiet class? Like the Zoom classes when nobody was talking and their cameras were off. So we don't want that, right? Teacher directs all learning. We don't want that. Students don't learn how to collaborate. Students' minds may wander out of boredom. Of course, I mean, if the teacher is talking, students don't have a very big attention span. So they are going to get bored eventually. The focus is on the instructor. The instructor chooses the topic and the instructor evaluates students' work. So all of these things, we are going to try to avoid them. What do we want? We want students to collaborate and communicate through group work. That's great. We can make them work in groups, in pairs, together, with the whole class, interaction. That's what we want. In a student-centered class or a learner-centered classroom, students ask questions and complete tasks independently. There is active participation. I ask for a lot of volunteers. Sometimes I feel like my students might say, oh, the teacher is going to call my name, right? So they need to be prepared. That's great as long as they don't get anxious, right? But at the end of the day, every time I've finished one of the courses that I teach, students are always glad that they could participate. And they usually tell me, oh, I'm not scared anymore of English, or I didn't like English. I like English now, right? So that's one of the best compliments that a teacher can get, I think. The classroom can be noisy. Noisy is good in this case, as long as it's controlled, of course. And students learn from independent learning and from each other. It's like when students teach each other, I've seen students kind of teach each other the rules for the third person singular with S, and one of the students were saying, oh, the girl walks, and the S because it is the girl, right? So when I see that interaction, it's like, oh wow, their learning is happening. I think it's great. Okay, I went to the chat. Active participation, personalized learning, focus on the students, very good. It maximizes the students' participation, very good. Age level needs kind of learners, very good. We are going to look at that. Very good. I asked them to teach each other and they love it. Absolutely, yes, they love that. And that's when learning is happening. Very good, thank you. Thank you for your comments, for your input. So the instructor, what are we going to do as teachers? We are going to model activities, not like a supermodel, not like a runway model, but we are going to give examples. We're going to give feedback, right? Do not interrupt students when they are saying something, for example. I always think that communication should be as normal as possible. And when I talk to someone in Spanish, for example, I don't interrupt them the whole time because they said or they mispronounced the word. So I just wait. Maybe if there is a pattern, I can talk to the whole class and discuss the pattern. What you can do, for example, is just keep a journal, and then you can talk to the student and say, you know what, look, I'm going to give you feedback on what you said, or a grammar structure. Of course, when they speak, all the ideas, learning is happening, and they're kind of like constructing the meaning and the sentences, and that takes time, and it's a lot of practice. So I always remember when my teacher told me once that I was being too hard on myself because I wanted to speak perfectly. And then he told me that as long as my English was communicative, it was good. So I said, okay, that's interesting, right? Like kind of a different approach towards learning a language. Now, I was not focusing on being perfect, but on being communicative. And that's the idea. That's what I tell my students now. Answering questions. We love answering questions. Teachers are always happy to answer questions. Sometimes when we ask if there are any questions and there are no questions, I'm glad because I assume that everybody understood. Sometimes I feel like, okay, is this true? Is it how do I know that you actually understood? So I need to make a few more questions and make sure that they actually understood. Let's continue with the student-centered approach. It is based on constructivist learning theories, and these theories put emphasis on the learner's role in constructing meaning from new information and prior experiences. So when learners construct meaning, it's an active process, right? And we are going to build information from their existing knowledge. They're not just empty vessels, and we are going to be the information feeder. But since they have lots of information, or they have a prior information, let's work with that, right? You are going to remember some of these theorists, Jerome Bruner, for example, with the constructivist theory of learning. He developed the concept of scaffolding, for example, and discovery in education. Jean Piaget, for example, with this theory of cognitive development. And well, he proposed the stages of cognitive development, right? We also have Lev Vygotsky with this social cultural theory of cognitive development. And well, he introduced the concept of the zone of proximal development. And David Ausubel, right, with the meaningful learning theory, when we need to, we need to emphasize the importance of clear organization and relevance in the material that we use to promote effective learning. Very good. I'll go to the comments now. Let them feel confident. Exactly. You're right. Thank you very much. Yes. Let's continue over here. Understanding learner needs and goals. What can we do to tailor our lessons to meet our students' needs? A lot of people in the chat box said needs, we need to consider their needs, their motivation. So what can we do to do that? All right, I'm gonna read the chat now. The most important is that the students understand. Yes, Sylvia. Very good. Catches their attention and they feel motivated. Okay, I'm going backwards. Let's go forward. So what can we do to tailor our lessons to meet our students' needs? Evaluate them. Okay, we can evaluate them. Like a diagnostic test, for example, right? So we kind of know where to go, what to do with them. Ask. A needs analysis, very good. Needs analysis, yes. That's a very good idea. Hello. Background knowledge, absolutely. Okay, that was good. This is fundamental. And well, it's an aspect of effective language teaching. It involves identifying and addressing the unique requirements, motivations, and objectives of each student to tailor instruction accordingly. I took that from Richards in the 96. He has a book called Reflective Teaching in Second Language Classrooms. I kind of paraphrased what he said, but it was the idea of, to tailor instruction. So we are going to look at some aspects that we need to consider apart from their age, from their gender, from what's happening now in the world. We have some things that we need to consider. I'll kind of refresh because I assume you know this. Let's start with the theory of the multiple intelligences. We need to start with the basis that the students learn differently. They have different intelligences. Well, they have them all, but they have developed some a bit more. So this theory of multiple intelligences was developed by Howard Gardner in his book Frames of Mind, and he suggests that intelligence is not a single fixed attribute of a person, but it's more of a collection of different abilities and talents. And he emphasizes in personalized learning and teaching methods that cater to diverse intelligences. So let's start, for example, with the linguistic intelligence, right? Which is basically the language, to use the ability to use language effectively. What can we do? We can ask the students to create writing assignments, right? Because they work so well with or they have developed that intelligence so much that they can write a lot, right? Reading comprehension, we can do debates with them, storytelling. What happens if I have students, of course it happens, logical mathematical, if they have developed that intelligence a bit more. We can work with puzzles, problem solving tasks, logic games, Grammar patterns. They love these grammar structures, the charts. Very easy for them to identify. I remember one of my students said, "Oh, English is easy. It's just like math." And I was like, "Wow, okay." Not for me, but if it works for you, it's great. As long as you can work with that, it's perfect. Spatial intelligence, the ability to visualize and manipulate objects and spaces. What can we do? You can use a mind map. You can create visual storyboards, or interpret graphs, right, and charts. If you have bodily kinesthetic intelligence, students, which basically using the body, they can role play. You can do a drama activity if you work at a school and it's allowed. It would be perfect. Musical intelligence, writing songs. I feel like I have developed this intelligence a bit more. So I learned English through music and songs, and well, I've always loved music. Um, interpersonal activity. They can do group discussions, collaborative projects. In the case of intrapersonal, they can have journals, for example, and teachers can read the journals individually. Naturalistic intelligence, it's basically, nature related, reading passages or reading texts that they can help students kind of motivate them, right? Because they're all different, and we want to get to all of them. It's not just, it's not going to be a personalized class with one student, but we have lots of heads to think. We can identify students' needs. Yes, do not forget to encourage them. Absolutely, very good. Let's continue with the second, let's continue with the second part of understanding learner needs and goals, the learning styles. Of course, you remember learning styles. This was developed by Neil Fleming and Colleen Mills, and it suggests that individuals have different preferences for how they receive and they process information. So this is the VARC model, and it's visual, auditory or oral, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. So when I think about visual learning styles or visual learners, I think about charts. I think about mind maps, graphs, videos, right? You can create videos explaining grammar points, and students can watch them later. It's going to stick in their minds, which is great. Auditory learning styles, they can do lots of listening, participating in discussions and debates. They can use rhymes or mnemonic devices to kind of remember information. Reading and writing, of course, they can read textbooks. We can find ways to encourage reading and writing in class. For example, at the university or the language center, we have a program where students can borrow books and read them at home and then return them, and these are graded readers. So if you're familiar with it, this is a great way for students who like reading in their free time, just for pleasure. And then we have the kinesthetic learning style, when they can role play, they can conduct experiments using movements, move around the class. If you have a smaller class, that it would be perfect, right? They can move around. We have cultural and linguistic diversity. We know that all of our students are different. They have different backgrounds, and we need to recognize and value their cultural and linguistic background. Having them exposed to different accents. Sometimes they have this misconception that English is this, the standard English is everywhere. But when they go to the States or they go somewhere else and they find people and talk to people from India and from China and Japan and Europe, and they don't have this standard English. So having exposure to different accents is the best. And then foster a sense of belonging and respect in the classroom. That's really, really important. And then we have motivation. Lots of people said motivation in the comment section. Motivation is really, really important, because a student that is not motivated is hardly going to learn. And therefore we need to find ways to enhance engagement and motivate students, especially during the warm-up stage, where the class is just getting started and we want to do something fun, do something different to get their attention, and then we can start the class. So let's try to find this X factor that we can, and so we can motivate students. We have different types of motivation. We have the intrinsic motivation, which is driven by personal interests and enjoyment, because they really, really, really want to learn the English. Like it happened in my case, I learned English because I really, really liked it. And of course, we have the extrinsic motivation. It's mainly because they have, or it's driven by external factors such as a reward, a certification, etc. We actually have here affects learning outcomes, because motivated learners tend to achieve better language proficiency. They tend to get better scores. And we need to fight with different stimuli. We have technology now. We have these devices, and it's hard to fight against my phone, because my friends are texting me and I have a call, and well, how can we fight against it, right? So just try to find ways to motivate students and tell them, just give me a moment and listen to the class, and then you can chat with your friends. We can do activities for that, peer activities, work activities, promote collaboration, etc. Let's go with the third point, which is student talking time versus teacher talking time. AI, yes, somebody said here, AI, make the students like English. Yes. We cannot force them to like English, but we can try, right? Thank you. So in your teaching experience, how do you currently balance teacher talking time and student talking time in the classroom? What are the things that you do to keep a balance? I'm reading the comments. All right. Find a way to motivate them. Yes. So, any ideas? How do we keep a balance? Promote lots of participation. Very good. Thank you, Fiorella. Inductive approach, questions, pair work. Very good. Right? We need to avoid talking the whole time, as we were mentioning before. Make silence or a game. Peer correction. I teach them the lessons, but I listen to them, ask them questions, share the session. Okay. Role play, pair work. Excellent. Very good. Yes. We know that there has been a shift in the teacher's role. The teacher used to be an information feeder and now is more of a facilitator. And let students shine. It's not time for the teacher to show off. It's not time for you to use the fancy words that you learned watching Bridgerton last night, but it's time to let them speak. It's time to let the students use the fancy words that they learned watching Bridgerton. And for example, if a teacher talks for half the time in a 60-minute lesson with 15 students, each student gets only 2 minutes to speak. So two minutes for 60 minutes, I think it's really, really little. So that's why we need to be aware of the time and how much time we speak, because every time you speak, you are, taking away time of the students, right? Open-ended questions, says someone. Very good. It happened to me that, well, I'm almost finishing my master's degree, and we are talking about, in one of my classes, we are talking about active methodologies, and I was doing a presentation with one of my friends about active methodologies, and we were talking about thinking-based learning. And well, he is an administrator. He didn't study education, and he started talking a lot. And then he was talking about lots of his experiences. And I was looking at him, and I said, we need to let students speak, right? So yeah, I mentioned it to him later. We were laughing. He understood, right? And he told me that it made total sense. So over here we have some of the advantages of teacher talking time and student talking time, and some of the disadvantages of teacher talking time. We don't have any disadvantages in student talking time because, they have to speak. They are the protagonists, let's say. So some of the advantages for or when the teacher is talking is that the teacher can explain things to the whole class at once, and he doesn't have to repeat and repeat, right? Students learn from their language used by the teacher because the teacher is going to model the language. The teacher can give clear instructions for activities. We need to be very precise and short with the instructions. Some of the advantages of student talking time is that students learn through language. When they talk, talking to each other is a great way to share ideas and learn from each other. It is also fun and it's motivating. And then I usually ask them to report what their classmate has said. What are some of the disadvantages of teacher talking time? If the teacher talks and talks, the students will have less time to speak, to read, or to write. If a teacher talks to a classroom of students, it doesn't mean that the students are actually learning anything, right? We learn through collaboration and teamwork and talking to each other. The students are the ones who need practice, not the teacher. And teacher talking time can make the class boring, and we don't want to have a boring class. We want the opposite, right? So how can we maximize the student talking time? I agree, says someone. Very good. Thank you. Correct. Thank you very much. So how can we maximize the student talking time? Use elicitation rather than explanation. Ask them, just give them hints, clues, so they can give you the ideas. Use of body language. It's important to use your body language. You can mime, you can use gestures, facial expressions rather than words. So you don't have to, talk the whole class. Getting students to give feedback to each other. When they are giving a presentation, for example, as long as it is, constructive and they don't do anything rude, that's allowed. Tolerating silence. Do not fill silences. It happens to inexperienced teachers in particular that they tend to fill silences by unnecessary talking. And silence is an important tool, not only when students are working individually, but also provides, this processing time. For example, I stopped, and when I stopped, my students usually raise their heads, and they're like, what happened? Did the teacher say something? So that, it's also a technique that you can use in class. It works. Don't steal the struggle. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable to watch students struggle to figure out the answer, and they need time. It could be so easy if I give them the answer, but no. You need to let them, figure it out on their own and see what they can do with the language. I usually tell them, try to find a synonym or say it in your own words. Because they said, teacher, how do we say that in Spanish? Or I'm sorry, how do we say that in English? Let's try to use a word that you know. Why do you try to find the most difficult word in the world? So just work with the word or the vocabulary that you have. Use individual work, pair work, group work to maximize the student talking time. And move from the front of the classroom. You can move around. It's going to be, better for the students to not feel like, okay, there's the presence of the teacher. But they are going to see you as not equal, because we're not going to be equal, but they are going to be comfortable with your presence if there is a good class environment. Turn your statements into questions and prompts. Stop repeating yourself. It's very tempting to say important points and instructions a couple of different times just to make sure that they get it, but let's not repeat ourselves. And it's important to have a nice classroom environment. You probably remember the affective filter hypothesis by Krashen, and it claims that the learners with a high motivation and self-confidence and a good self-image of themselves is going to be better equipped for success in English. So we are going to try to lower this affective filter, and that's why we want to create a good environment in class. Now, instead of asking for volunteers, you can use think, pair, share. The students can think, the students can work in pairs, and then students can share with the whole class. Instead of reading it yourself, you can get students to read. They can read in silence, or they can read, they can do echo reading after you. They can do choral reading, right, with you. Or they can read alone, right? So it's not just, the teacher doesn't have to do everything, right? Instead of asking, do you understand? Is it clear? Are the instructions clear? You can ask, what do we have to do? And then students are going to give you an answer. Because if you say, is it clear? They're going to say yes. And then when they leave, they're going to be like, what do we have to do? So just make sure that students can participate, include them, right, in all parts of the lesson. Okay, I'm reading the question. It also helps when you do mimics. Absolutely, yes, mimics. Very good. Students need to have a sense of investigation. Of course, yes, they need to investigate. Investigation is one of the pillars of education. Let's talk about authenticity in language teaching. That's a very important point that I included here, one of the principles. Real examples in language input. So when we talk about real examples and language input, we are talking about using examples from real life context to make learning a bit more relevant and engaging and natural. The way a person in the US would say, right? Or in the UK, or in Canada, or Australia, or any part of the world. We can include idioms, slangs, colloquial expressions. I remember in one of my courses, intermediate classes. I taught an intermediate class last year, I think it was, or 2 years ago, and we started the class. Every time we started the class with an idiom. So I had a slide of like 60 different idioms, the most popular ones, and we started with that, and then we ended with a different one. And so they were kind of, I asked them to tell me the meaning of the idiom before giving them the definition. They thought it was so fun. And then sometimes when they missed classes, they were like, teacher, what was the idiom of last class? So I had to like go back to the slide and tell them again what the idiom was. They loved it because it's something that happens on a daily basis of someone living in an English-speaking country. Real situations and communication scenarios. We need to encourage authentic communication tasks that reflect actual needs and interests. We can do a role play of a situation where students have to order food at a restaurant, or make a doctor's appointment, or ask for directions. These are things that happen, and they actually happen. For example, as you can see, there is a picture over here. It's a startup. It's a reading. It was part of a reading class. We work with National Geographic Learning, so I took this from a book, Life 4 or 5. I don't remember. So I was teaching about this. I was doing this reading class, and we worked with this book. The title was Startup. The title of the reading, and my students were so invested in the reading that they started to look it up. They were like, "Teacher, is this real?" And I was like, "Yes, all the stories in the National Geographic series are real." And they were like, "Okay, let's look it up." So we started looking up the information about the startup. We found the menu, we found videos, we found everything. So from that point on, we decided that we are going to Google extra information from the readings. They were super invested. I love that group. And I think it's great. It's great when the students are interested and they show that. Let's use authentic material. Of course, these readings are real. We can also look for newspapers. We can look for articles, videos on YouTube, for example, podcasts, which are very popular today. There are a few podcasts that talk about learning English, and I think it's just a great idea. Social media and online communities. In this case, we can encourage students to follow social media accounts that promote English language teaching. I remember I used to follow lots of teachers, and they gave free classes on Monday, for example, on Instagram. And it's great when you can combine for example, your Instagram, instead of giving time to just liking posts and chatting with friends, to learn English, right? And well, that's just an idea, right? And being exposed to different, or in this case, social media, for example, it is going to help with the exposure to English. Let's remember that takes approximately 200 guided hours to progress from one of the levels of the CEFR to the next. So the more they are exposed, the better. Okay, look, someone in the comments say, we read about the Freedom Writer's Diary entries and my kids loved it. Perfect. That's great. Yes, very, very good. Very good. Excellent. So here I have another picture. This is from a World English Intro, another book that we worked with, the World English series. And one of the reading passages is called The Cradle of the Inca Empire. And I love that students can relate to it. If they have ever been there, they can tell us their experiences, how it was, what they felt. It's great, right? They do not have to see cartoons. They can see real life pictures, beautiful pictures, pictures from other parts of the world. So if they have traveled, they might relate with a picture in Spain, for example, with a picture in Mexico, in Argentina, etc. So it's a very rich exchange, and it helps everyone. Another principle is teaching English and culture. So I have this question for you. Can you teach a language without teaching culture? What do you think? I'll go to the chat to see your ideas. What do you think? No, says not at all. Okay, very good. I like that we are in the same page. No way. Exactly. Language means culture, says someone. Obviously not. Language and culture are deeply intertwined. So teaching a language without incorporating elements of its culture is going to limit the learner's understanding of the language. We are not going to develop, for example, the sociolinguistic competence. So language and culture are closely linked. We have a very strong cultural context and an influence when we teach a language. So let's take a look at some of the ideas here. I have a quote. It says, no, nearly impossible. A different language is a different vision of life. He was an Italian film director, Federico Fellini, and I just love this quote. When I saw it, I was like, that's correct. It's a different vision. It's a different way of, looking at life. They just see life in a different way. And have you ever wondered, why are we so different? Why do we act so differently? So let's see. Since we are English teachers, or you want to become English teachers, we need to have this cultural awareness. And cultural awareness involves understanding that culture or cultural differences and similarities between both cultures. For example, discussing cultural norms, such as greetings, manners, social etiquette. Activities can include, I don't know, talking about traditions, talking about a country. I remember when I started the specialization program in 2020, we had to make groups and talk about one country. And I remember I talked about Canada. So when we talked about Canada and someone else talked about Australia, they were so different, right? And that's mainly because of history. History has a lot to do with it. Traditions, right? In the US, they have Thanksgiving, for example. We don't have Thanksgiving. So of course they see Thanksgiving as a different way. We just see it as, oh, they are celebrating something, but they see it as history. So it's very linked. And of course, it's very, very an important part of English language teaching and learning. English through music and films. Music and film is a big part of culture. It shapes the language. Therefore, using music and using films to teach English provides authentic language input and, of course, exposes students to the cultural context. I remember when I lived in the States, I started living with a family, and the family sat together like every Thursday, for example, at 5 p.m. and they watched movies until 10 p.m. and they didn't move. They didn't move. So I was a little bit shocked. It's like, wow, I've never done that with my family. They do it, and they were watching Star Trek, or I don't know, a very old show. I remember. I was acquainted with it, but it was not my cup of tea. So I was just watching there silently, looking at my phone, waiting until it stopped. So of course it's different, right? And they told me that movies are a great part of their expressions, their idioms. When they say, for example, "May the force be with you," everybody knows it's from Star Wars. But if you saw or if you watched Star Wars, for example, in Spanish, then it's gonna be hard to relate it. Or The Wizard of Oz, when they say there's no place like home, right? Or in Titanic, when they say I'm the king of the world. So these are expressions that sometimes, especially when we're looking at jokes, they might use it. And if you are aware of this, or if you've seen the movies, then you are going to get it, and you're gonna be aware. They are connected, etc. I'm sorry, correct. Yeah, absolutely. I was looking at the comments. Teaching culture students understand the language much better. Absolutely, yes, they understand much better. If students get immersed in the culture, then yes, they will be only translating the language. They are connected, absolutely. Thank you very much. The role of idioms, slang, and colloquial expressions, that's a big part of the culture as well. And this is, of course, part of the sociolinguistic competence that I talked a little bit. Basically because it involves understanding of the social rules. So how are you going to understand the rules if you don't want to learn the culture? That's going to be nearly impossible. Let's continue with the sixth principle, which is monitor and assess students' language development. And when we talk about monitor and assess students, we are talking about, their language development, and it involves continuously observing and evaluating students' progress to provide timely feedback and adjust instruction to meet their students' needs. So I have a couple of ideas when we come to monitor and assess students. First of all, we have observe students' errors. That's something that we can do in class. Someone said at the beginning, we can do a diagnostic test, we can do a needs analysis. So regularly observing students' errors or mistakes, it will help identify patterns in areas that need improvement, right? So if there's a pattern, you can just mention it at the end of the class and say, okay, most of the students here said people is. So remember, it's not people is, it's people are, right? And students are going to be like, oh yeah, I remember. I don't know why I said that. It's just practice, right? So you can keep a record of the common mistakes that students make. I remember I followed a professor on YouTube, and he talked about the 10 common mistakes of my students this week. And it was so fun. It was so much fun. I remember that YouTube channel. I don't remember the name of the channel right now, but I used to watch it when I was learning. So while I was watching the mistakes, I was like, wow, why do you not say that? So yeah, it's great to keep a record of the common mistakes during class. Provide strategic ongoing feedback. In this case, we are going to offer specific constructive feedback consistently to guide students' improvement. In this case, students with a high level of intrinsic motivation will do better and will take suggestions from the teachers at the moment of receiving the formative feedback. It happened to me that every time my teachers gave me feedback, I took it so seriously. And part of it was because I really, really wanted to learn. And when you're invested, then you took it seriously. Or you take it seriously, and it's kind of ingrained in my brain right now. You can use, for example, a feedback sandwich. Have you heard of it? A feedback sandwich. The first bun is going to be the positive comment. And then you are going to give the constructive feedback. And then another positive comment. So we can end on a good note with the students. And they don't feel like, wow, I made a mistake, I'm so bad. No, it's like, you made a mistake and you can correct it, you can move on, you can do better, which is the idea. Third, design very varied and valid assessments. You can create a portfolio, for example, for higher levels, peer assessment, self-assessment, writing tasks like compositions, essays or papers if they have a higher level as well, reaction papers, role play. You can do interactive listening tasks, formative games like quizzes or Kahoot. So there are so many different ways where we can assess in a formative and summative way. Then we have understand the relationship between monitoring and feedback. This is important because recognizing how continuous monitoring and timely feedback support effective learning will help students in a way that they haven't done in the past, for example. So feedback should not be avoided. Sometimes we feel like, it's just taking time away from the class, but we should do it, right? And during the class, checking the final exams so students can see what they did wrong, provide feedback to the whole class, or every time they have presentations. I remember that during my online classes, the students had to present, for example, and I was writing everything by hand. So I had to scan the document and I gotta send them to my students so they can receive the feedback. I couldn't skip that part because I remember how important feedback was for me. And I think that if maybe not all of my students are gonna receive it, in the same way, but I feel like it's so important. And some of them were really, really grateful. And some of them replied and said, why? And so I had to give a more precise and detailed explanation of the mistake in that case. So that was during my online classes. I also did it with Google Forms. I also recorded videos on Flipgrid when they did presentations, giving them feedback so they could see my face, and they could see that what I was saying, I was just saying like in a very gentle way. So please do it. Students are gonna thank you for it. And then, yes, feedback is to see if they progress or not. Absolutely. And then the use of rubrics and checklists. Providing clear criteria for assessments, it's going to help students. We have to do it before the evaluation. So right when you tell them, okay, we need to do this, this is what I'm going to evaluate. So you can use rubrics, you can use checklists. In one of the conferences in May, a month ago, Ms. Diana Bermúdez talked about technology, and she showed one of the web pages, which is Ruby Star, where you can create rubrics very easily. So now you don't have to invent the wheel because it has already been invented, and it's really, really easy to use. Let's continue. And this is going to be the last principle we are going to talk about. Okay, someone said, rubrics are necessary. Students need to know what they are going to be evaluated. Absolutely. Very good. Yes, feedback should be timely. Yes, that's a very, very important point. We're not going to give them feedback if they presented this week. I'm going to give feedback a month later, because students are not going to remember what they even talked about. Let's continue with our point. Principle number 7 and the last one. The correct use of technology. How do you use technology in the classroom? Tell me how you use it. Any ideas? How do you use any type of technology? A resource? Maybe you're teaching online, I don't know. I'm going to read the comments. I'm going to look that way. I bring. Okay, very good. Games. Okay, someone said games. Games are good. Thank you, Gladys. What else? What else do we do? Smartboard. I like a smartboard. I present the classes, a PPT, of course, PPT, as a resource. When I studied, right, in school, we didn't have PPTs. It was just a blank blackboard at the time. Videos, games, online. I work with PPTs. I present videos and PPTs. That's great. Excellent. I like how you can incorporate technology. It can actually make our lives easier as teachers. So let's start with UNESCO. So UNESCO has developed frameworks and guidelines to help teachers integrate technology in education. Some notable ones, or the ones that I found, well, they have lots of guides, but these are the books, like hard books and hard copies, which are available online, of course, about the ICT competency framework for teachers. We have one in 2008, when technology started to really be a thing, then 2011, and then the last one in 2018. All of these guidelines or books about the ICT competency framework for teachers looks or seeks to standardize the use of technology by equipping the teachers with ICT skills. During the pandemic, they realized that the teachers were not like tech savvy, and they had a hard time. Some of them had a hard time using Zoom, for example, using Meet, using Blackboard, and using other types of technological devices. So they had been ahead of the game, and they have created those books to kind of see how teachers can use technology in the classroom, integrating technology effectively to enhance the methods to make our lives easier as teachers. This is ultimately going to improve the learning outcomes of the students. And let's remember, students are digital natives. So they are kind of going to expect to use technology in their lives. In a rapidly evolving digital world, then it's crucial for teachers to be proficient in ICT. So we cannot be behind them, right? We cannot stay behind them. We need to keep up with the latest trends. And this kind of framework evaluates 6 aspects. We have the understanding ICT in education, curriculum and assessment, pedagogy, application of digital skills, organization and administration, and teacher professional learning. So what I'm going to summarize it, right? This framework basically looks for teachers to know if they can use technology correctly, if they know what sources of information and technological sources are going to be used. For example, if you're going to use Kahoot, do you know when to use Kahoot? You know that you're not going to use it in every class. Otherwise, this X factor is going to be lost, and students are going to be not interested anymore, right? I remember when I used Kahoot with my students, and I did it, I don't know, once every 2 or 3 weeks. So that was the element of surprise, and they were like, "Yay, Kahoot! We haven't done it in a while." But if you do it every day, then it's not going to have the same effect, right? It's a good reading. You can look it up, the ICT competency framework for teachers. And of course, when we talk about technology, we talk about the use of digital tools and resources like online dictionaries, learning apps, websites. We have thesaurus. We have Duolingo, for example, if they want to learn English or any other language. I was learning Portuguese not so long ago. Gamification, competitive yet really, really fun learning environment. We have talked in previous conferences about Pear Deck, for example, where you can gamify your class. Learning management systems or LMS platforms such as My ELT. Are you familiar with My ELT or Spark now? That way we can promote autonomous learning, and students can work outside of class whenever they want. And flipped classroom, which is also really, really it's really popular right now. I've taught flipped classroom in the past, just to people who didn't have enough time, but still it worked. It was a good experience. So over here, I found this periodic table. This is for English teachers and apps and platforms that they can use I realized that I used a lot of them. We have here Canva, we have Flipgrid, Word Wall, we have Edpuzzle, we have lots of apps and platforms. You can take a screenshot while this recording is going to stay in SBS YouTube page. We have apps and platforms for content creation, for communication and community, for evaluation and gamification, for programming, for organized ideas and boards, educational content, content management, and tools and resources. So if you're still teaching online, or if you can include those apps to the class, it would be great. Now, yes, it's great, right? Yes, I see that. I'm looking at the comments. Everybody's like giving me a thumbs up. So I want to. We are about to finish, and I found this other quote, which is encourage heads to think, hands to create, and hearts to love. I loved it. And it kind of reminded me of the 4 pillars of education when we talk about learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. So I realized after I found this beautiful quote that this is actually a model. It's called the 3H model. When we talk about heads to think, we're talking about the what and why. When we talk about heart, which we're talking about motivation. And when we talk about hands, we're talking about skills and tools. So these are the things that we need to, promote, and we need to, make students achieve, right? We want to make them, we want to give students tools. We want to motivate them. We want them to think critically. And some of the practical suggestions and conclusions of the conference is to promote student-to-student activities. We want to encourage interaction among students through pair work, group discussions. Let's remember that it's not your time to shine, it's the students' time. Let's create a supportive atmosphere. Let's remember Krashen's effective filter. We want to have a great environment so students can minimize anxiety, and we can create a supportive atmosphere where they don't fear making mistakes. We should we should personalize our tasks. We need to think about the levels. We need to talk about the needs. We need to talk about the interests. Yeah, we just need to keep those elements in mind at the moment of teaching, and realize that not all of them learn in the same way. And then we have continuous assessment and improvement. So we can implement ongoing assessment practices to monitor the student progress and identify areas for improvement. That also apply to teachers. And I really, really thank you for being here, because you're also thinking about your professional growth and you want to update your teaching practices. I think it's perfect. And teacher self-reflection and professional development, of course. We are happy you're here, and so you can self-reflect, and now you can think, okay, do I really, really think about my students, how their learning styles? Do I really, really think about their multiple intelligences? Do I think about aiming to a communicative approach? Do I measure my teacher talking time? So these are the things that we can reflect on. And so now you can, after, in a few minutes, you can go home, or if you're home, right, you can go to bed and think about it. Promote independent learning. We want to encourage our students to take ownership of their learning process. And of course, we need to provide opportunities for self-directed study. So let me finish with a pop quiz. I just want you to give me just select the right option. So it's gonna be a pop quiz. Let's see if you were paying attention to me. Thank you very much. Number 1, what is the primary goal of the communicative approach? A, memorizing vocabulary lists. B, mastering grammatical rules. C, developing communicative competence. D, improving handwriting. C, very good. Excellent, guys. Developing communicative competence. Okay, you paid attention. Great. I have another one. Hold on. Which of the following is a key aspect of the constructivist theory? A, teacher-centered instruction. B, standardized testing. C, memorization. And D, knowledge construction through experiences. Okay, I'm going to give you, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Gloria. Okay, people are saying D. Very good. Knowledge construction through experiences. Let's remember that we think about their students' prior knowledge to work on that, right? And to build on it. Let's go with number 3. Who proposed the theory of multiple intelligences? Neil Fleming, B. Howard Gardner, C. Lev Vygotsky, and D. Jean Piaget. What do you think? B, very good. Howard Gardner. Excellent. Number 4. We have two more. There are 5. Which activity is an example of promoting cultural awareness in language teaching? Drilling pronunciation, reading solely from textbooks, discussing cultural festivals and traditions. And D, focusing only on grammar exercises. People are saying C, very good. Discussing cultural festivals and traditions. That's going to give students a sense of, they will kind of understand what's going on in a cultural setting. And the last one, so we can finish. What is a key benefit of student talking time? A, increases student engagement and practice, reduces classroom interaction, focuses on teacher explanations, and D, limits student participation. What is it? All right. Letter A, very good. Increases student engagement and practice. That's what we want, right? We want students to speak. We want engagement and more practice. So, well, thank you very much for your time, for being here. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for all the information. Let me tell you that there are several questions. I don't think we have time for the answers, but most of them are related to all the topics that you have managed to cover, I don't know how, in such a short time. This has been a very rich session where we have remembered all the things that we learned when we became teachers, right? You went from the grammar translation method, covered everything, and reached to the point where we are today. This has been a wonderful session, very rich indeed. And some of the questions that you got today are how to provide feedback to students in an effective way, how to help students who don't like speaking activities. I think some of them might be covered in the upcoming sessions. How to use ChatGPT and AI in the English class. These topics were covered partially, not completely, in sessions 1 and 2 of the ELT training sessions held in May. How to create a good rapport with the students. Some of your topics cover that, right? The communicative approach could help you make students feel at ease and communicate. How to teach phonics for little kids, I suppose. How to model activities, how to promote students' autonomy. This topic will be covered, part of it, on our upcoming sessions, how to motivate students to take international exams. And is there anything you would like to say to probably cover some of the topics mentioned in these questions?
Just that when we teach, we need to keep in mind, their students' interests and abilities. So as long as we are thinking about them and you're not thinking about you, the class is going to flow. And just keep in mind the approaches, the communicative approach. Just make students speak, and yeah, just try different activities because everybody's different, right? And they learn in a different way.
Yeah, you covered some of that at the end of the session. I'm sure this is giving you food for upcoming conferences. So I'm going to send you the questions when we end the session. There is one more question. Will there be more sessions? Yes, this is the third one. We have a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. The fourth one will take place on August 21st. You will be receiving the link to register shortly and timely. This is a very broad question that will make probably everybody, project to the future. What's the future of teaching English?
Oh, that's
What
good.
is it? Yes. You know what? We are inviting you to attend session 3, 4, and 5. Well, this is the third one. The fourth, the fifth, and the last one. And together we can come up to a kind of answer at the end of the last one. How about that? So we have, a project for the next month. At this point, I would like to remind you to please register in the link that appears on the chat box. Yes, it's still there. In a couple of minutes, we will finish. Thank you very much, Simon, for gathering all this very useful information in an hour and a half. Yes, that is a big achievement. Thank you so much for that. I would like to remind you all that you will receive the certification plus a summary of today's session presentation organized by Mr. Schwarzemberg in 10 working days, provided that you filled the form. Okay, and I would also like to mention that these topics are covered in depth in the specialization program. The attendees to the 2 May sessions participated in a raffle, and Mr. Juan Galindo was the recipient of a full scholarship. Yes, he won a scholarship for the whole program that starts in August. Yes, so congratulations to everyone who attended the sessions in May. They also received a discount in the program, a 25% discount on the first installment of the program. And I would like to finish by congratulating everyone for devoting time to their professional growth. The time we dedicate to learning is a well-invested time, and you will see it in your students achieving their goals, their communicative goals, and communicating effectively in English. Thank you very much. Gracias, SBS Librería Internacional. Thank you one more time, Simon. Good evening, everyone.